little echoey in here. Richerson.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Chandler. I'm the Climate, Energy, and Air Program Director at Clean Wisconsin. Founded 55 years ago, Clean Wisconsin is a nonprofit, nonpartisan environmental advocacy organization working to secure a sustainable future for every Wisconsin community. With over 20,000 members and supporters across the state, we employ scientists, policy experts, and attorneys to protect and improve Wisconsin's environment. Clean Wisconsin thanks Chairman Gustafson and all members of the committee for holding this hearing and creating this opportunity for mutual learning today. As we've heard all morning, artificial intelligence is reshaping our world. And in Wisconsin, that transformation is taking physical form in massive new data centers. These hyperscale facilities, some covering over 1,000 acres, will have significant impacts on our communities and on our natural resources. Yet only scarce information has been made available to the public. Clean Wisconsin's recent analyses show a range of impacts that hyperscale data centers could have on our environment and natural resources, but we need project developers and public utilities to provide more complete and transparent data up front so that communities can fully understand the impacts on their lives. Wisconsin leaders and affected communities need more information, and we need a comprehensive plan to ensure that data centers coming to Wisconsin maximize community benefits and avoid harms. It's imperative that our state and local leaders take a hard look at how AI data centers will impact our air quality, drinking water, energy systems, land, and climate. Currently, we only have information from 2 large data center projects on their potential energy use. Those 2 projects, the Microsoft Data Center in Mount Pleasant and the Vantage Data Center in Port Washington, will require a combined 3.9 gigawatts of electric power. According to our analysis, that is enough energy to power 4.3 million Wisconsin homes. Now, Wisconsin has just 2.8 million housing units in the entire state. So in other words, just 2 of the AI data center projects approved in our state will use more energy than all homes in Wisconsin combined. Or to think of this another way, that's more than 3 times the power production capacity of Wisconsin's Point Beach nuclear reactor. And because only 2 of these hyperscale data centers have disclosed their power needs, we know that this figure represents just a fraction of what all proposed data centers will need. I'd now like to turn it over to my colleague Hannah to share her insights on data centers' water use.
Good morning. My name is Hannah Richerson, and I serve as Clean Water Manager for Clean Wisconsin. In addition to the energy concerns Chelsea noted, there are corresponding implications for water quantity and quality associated with hyperscale data center operations. Little water use information has been disclosed. Data centers rely on water predominantly to cool their servers to prevent overheating. While some developers have announced their intent to implement sustainable water use technologies, such as closed-loop cooling systems that circulate recycled water on site, the solution does not address off-site water use for power generation. Depending on the type of fuel, power plants use water for generating and cooling steam, cooling reactors, and transporting coal ash. In Wisconsin, power production is responsible for more than 70%, or over 1.3 trillion gallons of annual water withdrawals. That number will rise as energy utilities seek to meet data centers' immense power needs. The quality of our water is also at stake. Regardless of whether a data center or power plant employs closed-loop cooling technologies that recycle and reuse more water, at some point there is a water intake, and at some point there is a water discharge to a water source. The wastewater returned is warmer than ambient water temperatures, an ecologically harmful event known as thermal pollution. Higher temperatures can reduce oxygen levels that support aquatic life, alter the metabolic rates of certain species, promote the growth of harmful algal blooms, and impair sensitive species growth and reproduction. And, depending on the discharge source, the wastewater may also contain pollutants harmful to human health from fuel transformation, disinfectant, anti-corrosion, and other processes. While we do have water quality standards for effluent, they are not set at 0. More power generation means more industrial water use, and more industrial water use means more water pollution. In conclusion, because of their enormous on- and off-site water needs, hyperscale data centers pose serious risks to Wisconsin's surface and groundwater resources we rely on for drinking water, crop irrigation, and recreation. That's why the lack of transparency is so concerning. We simply cannot make informed decisions about what is best for our state's residents or natural resources without more basic information. We implore decision makers at all levels to take a step back, to understand the potential impacts of data centers, and consider their costs and benefits in a comprehensive way. Let us work together to keep our finite natural resources healthy and whole for today and tomorrow's enjoyment and use. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to open up the committee before I ask my questions. Representative Masson.
A couple of questions. Can you speak more to why energy demand from data centers are concerned, and are there ways that data centers can minimize their environmental impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're concerned about these high energy demands because we need to generate the power to meet them, and there's a variety of different ways we can do that. We heard that some of that load can be met with renewables, which is the cheapest, fastest, lowest cost way to supply that power need. But we're also seeing gas projects that have been approved, most recently in Oak Creek and Paris, to power those data centers. Those carry harms to local air pollution, as we've discussed, also to our climate. This year alone, we saw historic floods in Milwaukee, wildfire smoke coming in from Canada, fueled by climate change and other factors, mild winters that harm our economy, for snowmobilers and everything like that. So we're concerned about the impacts of climate and air pollution and on the health of our communities from gas. We're also concerned that this can lead to further postponements of retirements of coal plants, which also have their own climate and air pollution harms, and that are also the more expensive power source than alternatives. And so while it's a positive development that we're seeing more renewables being built to power these data centers, and that some data centers want to bring at least part of, or meet part of their load with new construction, we still need to build a lot of renewable energy to transition to 100% clean electricity, which is the goal of our state. That is a shared goal of our state's major investor-owned utilities as well. Clean Wisconsin and partners conducted an analysis a couple of years ago that looked at what it would take to get to 100% net zero by mid-century. And that was just looking at growth from more electrification in buildings and transportation and things like that. And that said we need 31 gigawatts of solar and 21 gigawatts of wind. And that was pre-AI and data center boom. So there's a lot of renewables that we already need to build. And so we're concerned that with this massive new load, even if we can meet it in the best way possible, it is still placing a large burden on all the infrastructure that needs to come online very quickly. As far as the second part of the question about ways that we could design these data centers more sustainably, I appreciated the comments that we heard this morning about innovation. I think we need to make sure that that is the standard that we're seeing in Wisconsin. I think there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to load flexibility. Tech companies can agree to reduce grid demands when supply is tight. I was just reading a report about how Google has signed contracts to do this in a few states, in Indiana and Tennessee and Arkansas, for example. And managing loads smartly can help us avoid overbuilding resources, so we don't need as many of those peaker plants or the plants that are running in just small amounts of time, as we just heard. And we really deserve that innovation here in Wisconsin too, and we need to make sure that that is the norm. There's more opportunities for energy efficiency on site, so we can try to take some of these massive loads down a notch. That could be things like considering geothermal or district heating. We also heard one innovative example about using the ambient air from outside, so those kinds of solutions would certainly be welcome. Another issue is backup. A lot of these data centers say that they need to run 24/7, 365, and so they need backup generation, and we see proposals right now for those to be met with diesel generators. Again, it's not running regularly, it's intended for backup, but they do have to run them periodically to test them, make sure that they're running okay, and that's significant pollution in our area too. So we'd like to see better alternatives, such as could those be met with, renewables paired with battery storage, for example, so we're not contributing to poor air quality in our area. So largely we want to see, innovation be the standard, not the exception, or just used by the best actors, and we'd like to see accountability to make sure that we're doing what these companies are doing what they say they will do.
Representative Smith.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was interested about your testimony on closed loop cooling systems. When I hear that term, I think closed, completely closed, not affecting the environment at all. But it seems that really isn't the case, that terminology kind of hides a bit of an issue. I was wondering if you could talk about that and actually also talk about the possibility of alternatives to using water in those systems or other possibilities.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yes, often closed loop is a bit of a misnomer because those closed loop cooling systems often have two circuits, only one of which is closed. So you can imagine one loop that's closed and then you have an open circuit, an open loop around that, which uses water predominantly. And so that open loop is where we see most of the water consumption, even in closed loop systems. Regarding alternatives to using water in those systems, we have heard proposals from developers to use glycol in the closed loop portion, not the open loop portion. That also comes with some environmental concerns. Most forms of glycol are toxic. At some point, that glycol, whether it's pure or mixed with water, will have to be replaced and have to be discharged somewhere. So ethylene glycol is what we use in antifreeze, for example. We know how harmful antifreeze is. A generally safer alternative to that is propylene glycol that could be used. Although the general safety of that is in lower concentrations, much lower than we would expect to see in large data center operations. Does that answer your question?
So I wanted to touch base. I like the holistic approach that you bring forward, not just with the data center, but with also the energy companies. Can you maybe divulge a little bit too into the holistic approach of the manufacturing of like the solar panels, the wind turbines, the long-term impact of those as a green energy, and how those are, again, as you're stating, the more sustainable route going forward. I like to think a lot of people forget that manufacturing is involved, and what does that look like for wind and solar comparative to, let's say, the natural gas or coal that you've mentioned kind of in the big picture of energy?
Yeah, I think when we're looking at any energy resource, any technology, we need to look at the whole life cycle. I think we tend to focus on the operation side of things, but as you say, it takes energy and resources, minerals, everything to manufacture these. So I would say that is true of solar and wind, as it is true of a gas plant, a nuclear plant, a coal plant as well. Because once the solar panels, wind turbines are built and operating, they don't require new fuels, they're not using fossil fuel, they're just running in a clean, efficient way. Their operation footprint is very, very small. So sure, there are inputs required, but when you compare from kind of a life cycle analysis, solar and wind versus gas or coal, when it comes to pollutants and greenhouse gases, water use, certainly, solar and wind come far, far ahead, and their life cycle impacts are kind of mitigated within the first years of use. And these are technologies that are long-term, long-running that can operate for 30 plus years.
Yeah, because usually, I mean, I'll come up very blunt with you. I think nuclear is going to be the route that is the cleanest by far and have the most minimal impact compared to gas, coal, wind, solar, geothermal, you name it. I think nuclear is the way we need to consider this, especially with data centers, as we mentioned, is 24/7 typically running. So how are we meeting that demand rather than trying to follow the cycle of weather essentially to meet our needs?
I think, you know, one consideration that I think is really critical when we're talking about we've heard a lot about the pace of these data centers coming online. I emphasize that, you know, solar and wind are the cheapest, cleanest, and fastest to deploy. So, you know, solar project, a wind project, you can build in 1 or 2 years. Gas takes a little longer, more like 5. And nuclear, we are looking at more like a decade or more. So I think there is a bit of a kind of fundamental misalignment in terms of meeting the needs today with nuclear. We've also talked a little bit about whether it makes sense to kind of isolate, you know, data centers and have them have their own kind of grid versus being more integrated. There are certainly benefits to being part of the broader grid, and that you can take advantage of where there are the cheapest, cleanest resources at different times. So you risk overspending and overbuilding if you need to have 24/7 reliable energy generation in a bubble versus if you can access the broader transmission networks, the grid, so that you could take advantage of cheap prices coming in from wind in the Dakotas, for example, versus having to run a local peaker plant or to have to overbuild for your on-site generation.
Yeah, and I'm glad you also kind of pointed out to where else this generation could be coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I guess my follow-up with you right now would be, WEC has stated that they're making significant investments here in Wisconsin, especially with clean energy, whether it's wind or solar, geothermal. Do you, as your organization, do you support the construction of these solar farms and wind farms in Wisconsin?
Absolutely, yeah. We're regularly in cases at the Public Service Commission supporting solar and wind projects. We want to see more of those. As I said, it's imperative that we bring more of those clean energy sources online to ensure a clean energy transition for our economy, and those are a big piece of the puzzle. The challenge that AI data centers bring to this is that suddenly we've got a much higher amount of energy that we need to supply, even if it is from renewables.
Because just like kind of the conversation with data centers as well is a lot of people, you'll see it online, they don't want it built in their neighborhood or near them. Kind of applies also to the alternative energy sources here. If we're talking wind or solar, they don't want to see these mass solar fields being built on farmland next to them, or mass wind turbines that are, maybe destroying what they see as a clean space. Like a great example is you're going down through my neck of the woods, Fond du Lac, you see massive wind farms, and some people go, maybe it would look nicer if we didn't have these massive, kind of ugly-looking towers generating energy. So, where do we find that balance? That's where I'm really trying to find is where are we considering, again, the place of, yes, we want these different energy sources, but are we balancing also the input of our constituency, which is kind of back to what I was asking WEC as well about the proposals and the input and how people can actually give feedback on these projects.
Absolutely, yeah. We're always balancing trade-offs. As I said, we want to make sure with these data centers that we're maximizing community benefits, that we're getting input, that people have the information that they need to make sound decisions for their communities. That's certainly true in the renewable energy space as well. I think there's a broad diversity of opinions when it comes to renewable energy. There are a lot of locals who do support the projects, and certainly some that are opposed. And it ranges from kind of aesthetics and what they look like to some of the benefits in terms of the money that comes into their communities as a result of these projects that they can put to use in fixing roads and whatever local leaders deem are necessary. So certainly trade-offs that we're weighing in every case. That's going to be true with any infrastructure.
Yeah, I just wanted a quick note on your nuclear comment. So some of the analyses that we've conducted at Clean on the water side have compared potential scenarios looking at
gas, coal, and nuclear, and I just wanted to note that nuclear is by far the most consumptive on the water side.
Thank you. Other questions from committee? I think that's it. Thank you very much. Next up, we will actually ask Vantage Data Centers to come up and testify.